Now, your navigation, was it mainly visual navigation, or did you do some radio beacon and the like to radio aids to help you pinpoint and get in anywhere? Or?
All the time that we were, before we got to the French coast or the coast of Europe, we could use a kind of a homing type device, and I'll remember the name of it later, but it was such that they had a number of stations in England where we could kind of radio beam off of with a little device we had. We could pick up the direction and the distance from a signal beacon.
Yeah, just kind of triangulation and.
Well, it was more than triangulation. We could do that on a single source.
We did that little sailing, just little RDFs,
Mm-hmm.
and
so we pretty well know what direction we were from an identified source of beam. We could tell what direction that we were from it, and we could tell how far we were from it. So we could pretty well point ourselves until we got to the European coast, the enemy coast. And at that time they jammed everything. They had the air just full of jamming frequency that we had to just go on visual. We were doing a little bit of dead reckoning, by going from point A that we could recognize, the coast of France, as an example, at a certain place that we could identify. And then we could do dead reckoning with undercover of clouds so that we couldn't see the ground. We couldn't do dead reckoning. We couldn't do...
couldn't do your visual navigation.
Yeah, couldn't do visual navigation. And we had capabilities, my knowledge of navigation and the instruments we had on board. We could pretty well keep up without seeing the ground. But we had to factor in whatever the projected wind direction and velocity that they gave us when we left England. We had to assume that when we got to the coast that it would be what they said it would be, and that it would be that way as long as we were over there.
How good were they with meteorology?
Well, not very reliable. Not very reliable. I remember getting lost once real bad. We went on a mission after D-Day, I believe. We went somewhere around D-Day anyway. We went bombing down in mid to southern France, not far off the coast. But when we hit the coast going in, there was a wind shift. The weather wasn't what it was forecast to be. We couldn't see a thing on the ground. And we were assuming that the wind direction and velocity were what they gave us, and it wasn't. And we got over there, and I don't think we ever got enough visibility so we could drop our bombs. And they headed for home, and the pilot said, "All right, now, how far are we from the coast?" And I gave him what I had calculated it to be. And that time went by, and some more time went by, and he was getting madder at me because I hadn't given him an accurate arrival time to back on the coast headed for England. Until he got back, and all of the pilots met together and realized that every navigator was having the same problem I was, unless they had radar on board, which only about 1 in 15 or 20 planes had radar. So
no, you didn't really stay as a squadron.
We stayed together. We followed, but I couldn't tell my pilot what time we were going to get to the coast.
Oh.
Kind of embarrassing, but then it turned out that all the navigators were just as confused as I was, and everybody was
had the same wrong information.
Yeah, the same wrong information. The next time that we went out, we had a tail gunner who got badly injured from flak. It almost killed him. On that mission, everything was in pretty good shape. We could see the ground. We had ourselves. But we ran into some heavy flak, and the plane got shot up a lot. But it was still responding. We could fly home easily. But the tail gunner, it became obvious pretty quickly, had been hit, and it was hit in the head, in fact. It didn't kill him, but we knew that we had a man who was in dangerous condition all the way back. So when we dropped our bombs and came back, And the pilot this time asked me, when are we going to get to the coast? Well, I had it down to about a second. We hit the coast right on my schedule. I was redeemed. And then he also asked me, all right, now, we're over the English Channel. We can break formation and head for the closest route back to base. Give me a route. Give me a heading. Well, I was able to do that. So I got redeemed with one mission for what hadn't been one or two missions before.
I know y'all were doing a lot of daytime bombing. I think that was a short period the Allies did that, wasn't it? Then went back to night bombing?
No, we never did go back to night bombing. I think the 8th Air Force came there with the intention that the British could bomb during the night, but we wanted to bomb where we could do the most good with our bombs in the daylight. So the Americans, the 8th Air Force, and everybody backing them up, stuck radically with the daylight bombing. And we did it from the year before I got over there in 43. They started doing daylight bombing during that time. They never changed their way of bombing.
How well had the Allies been able to clear the airspace at that time as far as
well, in 43 they hadn't been able to. There were a lot of planes shot down, and that's why people could go home at the end of 25 missions back in 43, because the odds were big that they wouldn't make 25 missions before they got shot down. It was that bad. Flak was bad, but the Germans didn't have superiority, but they had equal footing in the air with our planes. There were a lot of planes shot down in 43. In early 44, there were still a few. I mean, it was pretty heavy. By the time I got there, we pretty well had air superiority, and it was an unusual situation when we got unmercifully attacked by the German fighters for that whole year. And that's why they changed the requisite for being able to finish your missions and go back home. They changed it from 25 to 30, and then from 30 to 35 while I was there. So they'd taken it from 25 was, you couldn't do anything with 25, you had to keep on going. At 30, you could go home for 90 days. At 35, you could go home and stay. So that's what our crew was after, and I was still working on 30 when we got shot down. I'd gotten that far behind them when I had the mumps back in England. I didn't ever come to a place where I could have optioned to go home. But the rest of them went past 30, and they were on the 32nd mission when we got shot down.
Okay, yeah, I think you even mentioned one time there was a open position on the gun turret, and you at least had manned it during a run, though never really had a target you could go after.
There was one time when I operated my gun by my navigation table. I was really only doing what they had decided back at the briefing that morning. They'd said, well, some of the guys had said their guns were jamming and they didn't know it until we were having fighter attacks. So they said, well, all right, over the channel this time, shoot your guns and make sure they're operational before you get to the German coast. Well, I did that, scared everybody to death. So I was going to shoot somebody out of the air. Some friendly planes next door to us out of the air. That was the only time I ever operated a 50 caliber machine gun in the air. But up front, we didn't really get that kind of attacks. They were always coming from under our bellies or from the tail. Sometimes would come in real high at 12 o'clock, which is dead ahead. But I didn't have a gun that was in a position that could have done any good there. I was on the left side of the airplane, up front in the nose. So it really wasn't a good vantage point to shoot enemy craft down from. The better places were in the rear and the top turret and the ball turret underneath.
Yeah, they were a lot clearer of the rest of the formation.
Yeah.
As far as their fire field.
Yeah. So I didn't shoot any enemy planes down. Didn't even ever aim at them. It never came in my sight. The trip to Russia, which was on June 21st.
Yeah, just as a curiosity, what What had weather been generally like at that time? It's obviously late spring, early summer you were getting into by then.
Yeah, it was early summer, late spring, early summer, and the weather was generally good. We might get up in the morning and have a lot of overcast, which is just common for England. By the time we got to the French coast, they'd be cleared up to where we could see the ground. Most every time we went, we could see the ground all the way from when we were at around 25,000 feet. We had good weather. I understand the winters in England are horrible. Freezing and sleeting and snowing and all kinds of mess. And the people who flew during the winter had a real tough time. Had a lot of missions scrubbed. And then a lot of bad days to fly in.
Okay, well, on this run where you went over to Russia, what was your initial target you were going for?
We had a target, and I can't tell you, I don't think I can tell you the name of the target. We had three things to do that day. One of them was to bomb a city in Germany, and that was the east edge of Germany and somewhere below Berlin. I can pick that name up, I imagine, but we were to bomb that German location and go by the south edge of Warsaw and drop some supplies to their underground, to the Polish underground, and then go to Russia and land there.
And now your bombing took part at, what, about 24,000 feet? Or
yeah, somewhere along in there.
Pretty high up.
And we slipped down to about 10,000 to drop supplies off in the south part of Warsaw. That was rather futile, too. I think that most of the supplies that we dropped were picked up by the Germans. But, you know, it was a trial. But that was on the 21st day of June in 44. And that late afternoon, I'd say somewhere around 4 o'clock, we landed in Poltava, a university city in the Ukraine.
So what, you'd gone out, started early in the morning, wound up late in the afternoon before you hit your...
before we got to Poltava, Ukraine. Ukrainia, they called it then. It was a tent city that had been set up. This was a shuttle run that they planned to do several times. There had been one there ahead of us about probably a month before we went on our shuttle run. There were some other divisions that went over. So when we got there, they already knew. They had the crews that had set up tents, had dug slit trenches, had gotten the airfield in condition. The Germans had only been driven out of there about 3 months before we got there. So they had runways to patch. And as best I remember, we landed on a steel mat. They didn't have a concrete runway. I know sometime during that trip we landed on a steel mat. It was either there or at Margorad, which is the other base in Russia. But anyway, they were set up with local women cooks who were Russians, did the cooking, preparing food for us. We had some American sergeants there who made sure that everything was in good shape. The runways and the other facilities that were there were, I guess, the tents. And we were right next door to a university that was out of service because the Germans had occupied that part of Russia, the Ukraine and East, for some year, I guess. And they'd only been driven out recently. So there was a lot of war damage there. The city, they told us, was about somewhere close to 500,000 people lived there at Poltava, which was almost within sight of the base. We could walk to the city, but there wasn't one building that hadn't been bombed out. A lot of walls were standing, but there weren't any roofs in any of the brick office buildings or whatever they were that were the city itself. No homes that I can remember seeing. So I guess that the people, that 500,000 people who'd lived there were gone, and nothing was left except a few hammer owners, farmers, and other people who'd managed to scratch out a place to live and a way to get food by the time we got there. It had been a big, important University City, but it was just a shell of a place when we were there. Anyway, to get on with the story, about late afternoon, just before sundown, we saw some German planes that come in that were at very high altitude, probably somewhere around 40,000 feet. They were obviously doing reconnaissance work on our base. The Russians attempted to put up some fighter planes to intercept the German planes that were on reconnaissance, but they didn't have anything that could go to that altitude to begin with, and they couldn't have gotten up there before the Germans got all the pictures they wanted, because it was a good clear day and the sun hadn't quite set yet. There wasn't any option. There was no place to take our bombers to get them out of harm's way. We just ate supper and went to bed, and we slept in tents. And somewhere around midnight, the sirens began to blow. The people began to blow whistles to get us out of our tents and get us into some slit trenches that had been dug. The only one I really knew and was acquainted with was the one near where we ate at the mess hall, the mess pavilion, which was also tents. We got out of our tent. 4 officers stayed in one tent. All we had for lights was one flashlight. We got enough clothes on to get out, go to where we remembered that we had the trenches, and pile into them. The trenches were not adequate to hold everybody. We were just stacked in on top of one another. The bombing started, and the bombing, according to the pilot's log that I'm sitting here looking at, it lasted 2 hours. Now, in that time, they dropped all the bombs they wanted to on our 36 aircraft that were parked out across the little railroad from where the tents were, from where our tents were. They hit a Russian anti-aircraft site that was only about 100 yards from us. They bombed it. As far as I could tell, killed everybody in it. There was some journalists, photographers in it, as well as the crew that operated the anti-aircraft guns, and they were all killed. When the Germans finally quit dropping bombs and strafing and went home, we got out and walked around to see what kind of damage was done, and they hadn't hit any part of the tent area. They had knocked out all of our 36 airplanes, all except 8. They had knocked out this anti-aircraft location. By that time it was like 2 o'clock in the morning. Wasn't anything to do but assume that they wouldn't be back and get in our tents and sleep till morning. When we woke up in the morning, we could hear some kind of explosions over on the base, over on the hard stands where the airplanes were across the track. It was about 150 yards away from us, I guess. They told us not to go over there because there was anti-personnel bombs, frag bombs, lying around all over the place, and they were popping up, and they'd pop up about waist high and go off, and if there's anybody nearby, it would hit their vital parts of their body and kill them. So we didn't lose anyone. We lost a guard. One of our crew people who'd come over with us was up there to stand guard. I don't think he got killed, but he got injured. Quite a number of Russian personnel were killed. Anyway, we were stranded, nothing to do but wait till somebody could come ferry us out whenever they could. I think we stayed there about 8 days and all. The only thing that we could do that was productive on about the 4th or 5th day was to load up in trucks and go 40 miles away to another base where there were another 36 B-17s that had been flown in the same day we came in, and they needed to be refueled and reloaded with bombs, so all of us went over there to help get that job done, and we only stayed about 24 hours and came back to the base. And shortly after that, we were flying the bombers out to England by way of Morocco. We had 8 bombers. We got on one of the bombers that was going out and joined another crew. There were, instead of being 9 or 10 people on board, there were about 14, and 2 of which were a Russian pilot and a Russian navigator, and I was assigned the job of standing by the Russian navigator who could speak English, relay his directions that he was given to us to fly by English to the pilot and one of our bomber pilots who were also up front. I relayed the message to the pilots on directions, and we were going south to Tehran, Iran, where we landed that afternoon.
The Russian navigator was telling you.
I don't know why he didn't speak to his pilot. I
guess he was probably afraid
yeah.
his accent or something wouldn't make it clear enough to the pilot.
But anyway, that was my job, to sit there and take his information. And I remember one thing the only thing of any consequence I can remember about the navigation part of it was that we were approaching a mountain range which lay between the Ukraine, which is pretty flat terrain. Between there and Iran, there's a mountain range that was about. Well, anyway, he gave me it in meters, the height of the mountains in meters, and I had to quickly in my mind remember that for every meter is over 3 feet, and I translated it to 10,000 feet, and that got us over the mountain. But everything else was to make minor corrections in the direction we were flying. It wasn't much of a job. And we landed in the airport north of Tehran probably about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was in the hands of the Allies. There were soldiers there from the States, from England, and from France. They had really set it up for enjoyment. It was pretty certain that they had set it up for their pleasure and comfort. They
were pretty secure that it was way out of harm's way and could.
They had plenty of nightclubs, and the whole city was open until probably midnight every night for the vendors and the shops and everybody else. Of course, we went in and checked on that and bought some stuff for our wives and mothers. And the next day, somewhere around late morning, they took us back down to the airport in trucks. We got back on our airplane, one of the salvaged airplanes, and flew from there to Cairo. And it was not a great distance. The best I remember, it took about 3 hours to fly from Tehran to Cairo. It may have been less than that. We flew not quite directly over Jerusalem, but almost. It was off to the north side of us, but with my maps I could make out that it was Jerusalem, and also that there was a city right nearby that it had to be Bethlehem. It was an interesting flight in that we realized we were over the places in Israel that we were, and then we came to the desert that lies between Israel and Cairo. And when we passed
Sinai,
the Sinai, I guess, and when we came near the Suez Canal, the British were in charge of that area, and they made sure that we got down to no more than 1,500 feet to cross the canal, which we did. And we all knew where we were going. We could see that we were approaching Cairo. Everybody got real comfortable. We were 1,500 feet, flying over the Suez Canal. We were so relaxed that about 4 or 5 of us sat in one of the waist doors, let our feet dangle over the side of the airplane. At 1,500 feet, we didn't even have our parachutes on. A thermal could have thrown us all out. Anyway, pretty quickly we got to east side of Cairo. There's a little community, a little built-up modern-day community there, and I can't remember the name of it. We landed there, got in trucks and went to the base where we were supposed to stay until we flew out again. Needless to say, we took full advantage of being in Cairo and went out every night until they finally caught all of us and rounded us up and said we had to be back on our airplane in the morning. That took about 3 days. And then we went from there to Tripoli. We got to Tripoli, I believe, on the 3rd of July in the afternoon. And on the 4th of July, they had a big Independence Day celebration for us at the British Embassy. Real nice place. And we stayed in a real nice hotel there. It was right down on the waterfront at the British Embassy. They threw the party out on the lawn around the embassy, and we had a big feast and drank a lot of beer and wine and shot a lot of firecrackers that they brought in. They were very hospitable to us. After staying there about 3 days, apparently, according to the pilot's log, we left Cairo on the 4th of July and got in there on the 4th of July. It must have been the same day, that evening. On the 6th of July, we left Tripoli in our same aircraft that we salvaged out of Russia. We went to Marrakech, Morocco. According to the pilot, we pulled a 100-hour inspection on the airplane engines and found them to be in good condition, and spent about 3 days there. Stayed there until the 9th of July, and we had an opportunity to go into the city of Marrakech with the local American officials who were there. There was a provost marshal, and he took about 4 of us on his Jeep, took us around to see all the sights inside the city of Marrakech. They said that 250,000 people lived inside the old walls of Marrakech. I would judge that the whole city inside the walls wasn't more than 2 miles or 3 miles across. And it was just packed with little Middle Eastern type neighborhoods where in one building with one room the whole family slept, plus their animals. They brought their goats inside and whatever else they had, their dogs, whatever. They all at night went inside, bolted the doors, and spent the night, didn't come out till the next morning. Apparently it was a dangerous enough place to be that they didn't want us there without escort. That was the old city, and right next door to the old city on the west side of it was the modern French city of Marrakech. And they had wonderful restaurants, and it was really upscale. We had to clean up and shave and everything and dress up to go to that. On the evening of the 8th of July, somewhere around 10 o'clock, we all got back in our B-17 and took off to get back to southern England. And to do that, we had to go by Spain, which was not friendly. We had to go out into the Atlantic Ocean, probably 50 miles or so that we didn't get any closer than about 50 miles to Spain, and fly all night until we got to southwest England to a place called St. Morgan. It's right on the coast, and what I can remember about St. Morgan was that, now I think this was a Sunday, we had a nice dinner, and after dinner it was still daylight, and we went down to the waterfront where the surf was just pounding. Tide was coming in. You wouldn't have wanted to been in that water, but a bunch of English airmen were swimming by a wall. I would have been afraid that I'd get bounced against the wall, but they were having a big time. The water was real deep. It wasn't like a sandy beach. It looked like it was 10, 12 feet deep, and the tide was just beating on the walls. And they were having a heck of a good time. Anyway, we watched them, went back, and the next morning I think we actually did not fly that airplane. I believe we went out on Air Transport Command planes the next morning to go back to our base at Nettival. And that's the end of that story.
Now, I remember one little aside you told us as kids, I'm not sure it was in Morocco or in Egypt, that place you were staying had some kind of bars like on the window, but you kept all your belongings out of sight so the kids couldn't reach in with long poles and hooks and
That was at Tripoli. The English who held most of the bases there put us up in a hotel, and it was a real nice hotel, real nice, and it was right on the water, right at the shore. And the dining room actually was underwater. We went it through a tunnel and out to the dining room underwater. Anyway, real nice place. And there's no air conditioning. In the city, being as close to the ocean as we were, it was cool enough to sleep at night. So we wanted the windows open so that we'd be comfortable, but they said don't leave anything out on a dresser where they can see it, or anything inside the room. Put it in a drawer, hide it under your bed or something, so that the little urchins can't see the stuff in your bedroom, and put in a pole and with a hook on it and steal your wallet or something. So we did. Kind of along the same lines as that, when we were in Cairo, they said the only way you're going to get rid of urchins coming along pulling on your coattail and begging is to carry a wog whacker. And a wog whacker was a leather crop that you beat people off that hung on to you trying to get a handout.
Yeah, I think you still had that when I was young. Thought I remember seeing it around somewhere. Of course, like most kids, we played with it till we wore it into nothing, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think we were treated well at every place we stopped on that run. Everybody took good care of us, would like to have something from us if they could get it from us, but everybody was good.
Thought I'd remembered you talking about when you were in Russia, maybe more around Georgia or something. The locals weren't real happy with you because they felt the Germans were more liberators. They let them out of Stalin's control for a short while.
Yeah, that's just a supposition. I don't know, but I know that when we went over to Margorad to fuel up the bombers that did not get hit, and we're going to bomb southern occupied Europe on the way out, and then stop at American bases in Italy. That was what we were supposed to do, and we were helping them to get ready. Anyway, while we were there in Margorad, refueling and reloading the other B-17s, we went on a little walk in the residential area of this city, and little kids, little Russian kids or Ukraine kids, whatever they were, came up behind us and threw rocks at us and yelled at us. They were obviously unhappy with us for some reason. So that's the only place that we went to that we weren't received and hospitably and treated hospitably on all that trip. It was real nice to get back to England where our waitresses wherever we ate could speak English.